Hi there, it's Rita, and I'm so pleased to bring you this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. This week, we're joined by Suzie Thoraval, who I'm about to introduce. But before I go ahead and move to Suzie, I wanted to give you an insight into who Suzie is. She's an expert in leadership, mindset, resilience, and preparing for risk and uncertainty. Suzie has quite an extraordinary career. She's got 25 years of experience across government, corporates, non-for-profits, and universities here in Australia and internationally. And she brings deep strategic insight from her diverse leadership roles. Her career includes 13 years in government and 15 years practicing law in a large corporate legal firm and also practicing in other major law firms. So I think what we're going to, I know that what we're going to get from Suzie's conversation today on the Deliberate Leader is how she's transitioned through from, her various roles in risk and legal into her new chapter, which is really around managing adaptability and helping leaders to be more adaptive in terms of how they, deal with change and also risk in their organizations. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Hey, Suzie, thank you so much for joining me today on our Deliberate Leader podcast. Great to have you here.
It's an absolute pleasure, Rita. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, actually. I know we've been connected for quite a while now, and of all places, saw each other at a company directors summit earlier this year. But I know we've been following each other for quite a while. I'm a big fan of your work, and I thought it would be great today to have you on just to get your insights and to share those insights with deliberate leaders, particularly around your area of research, which continues to emerge. And I know you've got a book coming out in 2025, which is around this concept of adaptability and stability. So I know it's going to be a great conversation today.
Fantastic. Thanks.
I thought we would kick off, and this is a question I like to ask all our deliberate leaders that come on to share their wisdom. But in your mind, Suzie, I know you've worked in lots of different sectors and you've played in that space of executive leadership and also at board level. So you've seen like this time and time again. But what are the essential qualities and characteristics of a deliberate leader in terms of what you've seen and maybe what you embody in that deliberate leadership kind of space?
Yeah, so I think that a deliberate leader really needs to be prepared for change and uncertainty, particularly, today's world. And that consists of developing a mindset that embraces change, sees challenges as opportunities, having the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances, adjust their plans, let go of their rigid expectations, and the resilience to develop coping mechanisms to bolster them and their teams in challenging times. I think, we need to enable ourselves not only to live with the changes that the future will inevitably bring, but also take opportunities that those changes will bring and thrive in a new state of uncertainty.
Yeah, I know, Suzie, before we hit record, your book, which is coming out in 2025, is Adaptability. No, let me get that right. You better say the title because I think I've written it down wrong.
Adaptive stability, the future keeps coming.
Adaptive stability, because I'd written down adaptability, stability, and I'm like, there's way too many issues on the end there. And we were talking about the future keeps coming. And I said to you, how fantastic is that, right? And based on what you just said there around those deliberate leader characteristics that you've experienced and seen and no doubt embody, it is about the future keeps coming. Like we actually can't stop it. What are your experiences around leaders if they do try and stop that train? And I imagine it would be pretty hard for them to do that. But what can happen around their deliberate leadership when they try and resist the fact that change is coming?
Well, I think deliberate leadership can kind of go out the window and then they start being really reactive to, events, unexpected events, and can keep themselves in a kind of constant crisis mode. And so they're in that fight or flight mode, and their teams it sort of trickles down. Their teams all start to feel that as well. And then that's not good for anyone. And the culture suddenly starts to be in this mode of emergency all the time. And that's just not sustainable, in my opinion. And that's when you get, stress, burnout, attrition, presenteeism, all of those. And then for the leader themselves, that's when they'll also be burned out and unable to kind of put their head above water. They're just constantly reacting.
Yeah. I reckon it's really hard for leaders to make those decisions that require clarity and strategy when they're caught in the reactive.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's have you had any experience of that, and how have you dealt with that if you have experienced it?
Yeah, I mean, in government, things. I've been leader in government for 13 years, and the front page of the Herald Sun can dictate, what the day's about, and what you thought your day was going to be about gets kind of hijacked by whatever the sort of issue of the day that you have to respond to is. So yeah, that it's especially in sort of heavy moments like maybe the annual report's due, maybe there's a public accounts and estimate hearing due, and you've got lots of things to prepare. You can get into that really reactive cycle. I think it's really important not to get too caught up in it, and because being responsive is really important, but so is sort of keep continuing to deliver.
Yeah.
And you can't continue to deliver if you're just so stressed out you can't sort of function or think.
So, what tips would you give, Suzie? So, to leaders, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners would find themselves in this position where they are constantly feeling like they're reactive. I've got a lot of them say, I don't feel like I can engage in any planning. I don't feel like I'm ever on top of things because I'm in constant reaction. What are the best ways to actually calm the mind and calm it down so they can move more into that proactive rather than reactive space?
Yeah, I think for leaders, and I always say this, I use the analogy of, everybody's hacking through the jungle. It's really thick jungle. They've got a machete. They're, really trying hard to get, the pathway through. And the leader just really needs to stop and climb a tree every now and then and figure out whether you're actually going in the right direction. And so even when you feel like everything's on top of you, I think pausing is really important, because in that pause is that moment where you can make a different decision, and just sort of think about it. So, yeah, I mean, if it's all happening all in the moment, then even just taking a pause, taking 3 deep breaths and stepping back from the situation can be really helpful. But then there are other things you can put in place that are sort of more long-term things. So the mindset, step back, observing your own thinking so you're not caught up in your own thinking can help shift. And then things like taking the time when you can to know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, know what your values are, what are your goals, those kinds of things. So when you can, that planning both for yourself and for your team is essential.
Yeah.
Growth mindset is always important. I think stay open to learning, to changing your beliefs as things sort of change.
Yeah.
Stay positive, believe in yourself. Again, that can be challenging. I mean, I really am a big fan of affirmations. So I'll be, walk into the train in the morning listening to positive affirmations,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, just to set your day up right. Even if once you get in the office, it's all going to be crazy, at least you've had that moment to kind of just center yourself. And then, that flexibility, I think, is important. Consider diverse voices. So when you've got a decision to make and you're in your panic, seek out voices that maybe don't think the same way as you do or have got a different skill set to you that might look at things differently. And just be willing to change your decision if you can see that it's not going well. or that it hasn't worked. Don't stay rigid in that.
Yeah.
And resilience, I mean, that's, self-care, support systems, going for that run, or whatever it is that you do to move your body that makes you feel good. Taking, if it's meditating or taking a rest, going for walks in nature, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Again, all really hard to do when you're in chaos, but sometimes that's the time when you really have to.
I often find myself saying to people that all those practices that you would be engaging in, rather than just engage in them at the time that you need them, what can you be doing to really be practicing those things well and truly before you actually need them? Because otherwise we find ourselves going, oh, I'm really stressed. I probably should do some meditation or, pop on a calm app or go for a run or a walk. They're the moments where we often don't have the time or the headspace to even be engaging because it's counterproductive. Our brain's like, you need to go, you need to deliver, you need to do. But, I reckon that when we need it is probably too late. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That's absolutely right. That's what I really encourage leaders to do, is do that preparation, because our neural pathways don't just click into place if we do it in fact, they can't do it when you're in flight or fight mode. It takes time to develop those habits so that they become natural. And so absolutely prepare beforehand and get into those good habits beforehand, then helps just bolster you. And I can't underestimate the value of support networks too. Like, it's really easy when you're very busy not to talk to us, and not to go and have dinner with a friend or talk to people, but those support networks will buffer you in times of stress as well.
Yeah, it's always calling on the network again regularly. It's part of, what we talk about in nurturing that network, but accessing the network and also giving back to it regularly. So when you need it, it's ready to catch you,
Exactly.
rather than taking from it in moments of high stress and those periods where we need to be demonstrating some of this stuff here.
Yeah, it's all preparing for that uncertainty,
Yeah.
um, which, is borrowed, I suppose, from risk management concepts, which I've worked in risk a long time. And that's what you do, is what can you put in place so that when and if the uncertain event happens, you're prepared and you can mitigate it as best you can.
I really love that. Often, that's, many that are listening that have got those risk management frameworks in place in their organizations. That's language that I think will resonate. Suzie, you mentioned, being willing to change your decisions. So around that adaptability piece, which is a big part of your work, I know. Do you reckon that leaders are challenged by that? Because I speak to leaders sometimes and they say, I want to be adaptable, but I don't want to be flip-flopping around with my decision either. I want to demonstrate to, my stakeholders, my team, other constituents that I'm firm on a position. And then there is absolute benefit, like when circumstances change, that we've got to have that adaptability and be willing to change. So we're not sacrificing, the potential outcome of situation, just, cutting off our nose to spite our face. How do you think leaders are best placed to do that well? So they don't appear to be changing all the time, but equally demonstrating flexibility in their approach and their decision making.
Yeah, I think communication is really a key part of it, and vulnerability. And, I think if you're comfortable enough in your leadership, you can explain why what you thought was the right thing in the circumstances that are now upon you has to be changed. And if you can really work out the right narrative, I think that people are willing to accept that, and they don't see that as flaky at all. They see that as adaptable. They see that as somebody who's willing to kind of, is not rigid and willing to kind of change their mind in the face of circumstances that are obvious. So yeah, to me, vulnerability and communication is the way. And if you can tie it back as well to, say, a long-term strategy or a long-term outcome that your organization is maybe trying to achieve, that helps the narrative as well. So, this decision might be changed in the moment, but it's all for the good of this longer term goal.
I think that helps to guide people around the thinking for a leader, because things do change they do change, and we often don't plan for that. But if we can, as you say, give people a different insight into our narrative as we are thinking and doing, it makes it easier for people to follow, right? So they're not, maybe that perception they might have of us that's flip-flopping, they actually then get to see behind the curtain around the decision making and why that decision has needed to change.
Yeah, and if you maintain, like, if the decisions you're making are true to your own values and to your organization's values, and you tie your communication to that, that shows continuity. It's not like you're flip-flopping, one day you're over here and the next day you're over there. There's a rationale for why you're changing, because you want to maintain the values and, the long-term outcomes. I think that helps.
Yeah, great. So we've obviously talked about navigating that balance, because I think that is absolutely true. And I know a lot of leaders struggle with that in particular. And now I want to go to some of those common challenges or misconceptions that you've observed in relation to deliberate leadership. And whether you've observed them because you've experienced them or you've observed, others. But what are some common challenges that people make, or people have rather, in relation to deliberate leadership?
I think in high stakes environments, leaders can feel like they absolutely have to react quickly to a situation, which might sacrifice thoughtful decision making for speed. That's when you might get decisions that aren't actually aligned with long-term values or goals. So I think that being deliberate doesn't necessarily mean you're slow.
Yeah.
It just means you're mindful and you're strategic.
Yeah.
And that can help you respond when decisions are needed. So, I'd really encourage leaders to find that balance between the thoughtful planning and the need for agility in those dynamic environments. And again, the consulting the diverse voices, the preparing for uncertainty that we've already talked about, knowing your long-term strategy, your strengths, your values, all of those things, I think can help that that sort of feel like you need to respond quickly and just take a moment, to, as I said before, that sort of take that pause before you react, I think really can help.
Yeah, I love what you said there, Suzie, about not sacrificing quality decision making for speed. We've got different people needing different things from us, and we can get caught in that reactive, as we've discussed, rather than just taking your time. And no one will necessarily, they'll criticize you for the wrong decision, but no one will criticize you necessarily if you're just taking an extra moment, and whatever that moment is, whether it's a minute, an hour, or a day, or a week,
Yeah.
just get to that right decision.
Yeah. Having said that, I think another challenge is around struggling with overthinking or being stuck in analysis,
Yeah.
sort of that analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
And I think that can cause delayed action. So it's almost the flip side, can cause delays in actions, and then you miss opportunities that way. And that can be particularly bad common if they're risk averse as well. They've sort of got that risk averseness to them. So that's about developing your self-confidence, I think, in being able to make decisions, in your own decisions, and focusing on progress rather than done is better than perfect, or decided is better than perfect. Confidence in your own, not needing to consult everyone and their dog, just having your confidence in your own beliefs and what you think is right.
That requires some tuning in, I reckon, like a whole heap of self-awareness, but tuning in to be comfortable with whatever it is that you're communicating. So to me, as you were saying that, the word that comes to mind is that conviction. So that really strong, it's more than confidence, but that strong belief, because you've done the thinking without overthinking. Because I think that's a good call out. I reckon a lot of, and some organizations, let alone managers or leaders, but some organizations can really get caught in this, no amount of data is enough data, we've kind of got to continue to research. They lose their advantage, because then there's someone else out in the marketplace going, well, we're gonna get there quicker than you and release that thing, or launch that thing, because some organizations can culturally be stuck in overthinking.
Absolutely. My favorite phrase lately is move forward with imperfect action. So,
Why has that come into your orbit, Suzie?
oh, I suppose for me, with my business, and I suppose I have a legal background, and so my training is to get it really right and airtight and perfect. And so I suppose the last few years I've been sort of unlearning that in some ways and just saying, just get out there and do it, because otherwise you can be constantly in motion but not actually taking action. So with my own practice, so that's a real mantra that I say to myself every day.
Yeah. That unlearning, because I'm curious about that too. I think that you get to a point in your career, particularly as leaders, we've earned the role often as leaders because we're great technical experts, or we have deliberately forged a path of leadership. But along the way, we learn a lot of stuff that, either through poor role models, or maybe habits or systems and processes that we think have served us well that no longer serve us well. And so I really like that concept of we've almost got to unlearn. How do you help yourself to unlearn things that might have served you previously but no longer serve you?
I think it's where what I said before about mindset and that observation of your thinking comes in.
Yeah.
Uh, so, really just stepping back when I'm going, oh, this has got to be perfect before I can put it out there, and just go, well, does it actually? And you're saying that, but how true is that? And just, yeah, so sort of challenging your own thinking and not getting lost, like your train of thought is you, because you can be the observer. And I think that really helps. I mean, there are a lot of positive things from my legal training, and precision of language and all of that stuff has been invaluable no matter what I've done. But yeah, that's some of that unlearning. And I wonder too, I've done some insight into my own sort of like personality preferences and that kind of thing. um, I'm letting my own natural personality come out from the lawyer that was, because
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know that I was in the right career because I'm a big picture thinker rather than a kind of like to be down in the detail. So I suppose that makes it easier to that mantra about move forward with imperfect action actually appeals to my personal preferences without the legal training, if that's making sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And how have you found, because that's quite a shift. So obviously moving into this area that you've now deliberately, wanting to move into, you've got a whole heap of expertise around risk management and obviously the law. How is that serving you in terms of, because you don't want to throw that away, that's throwing baby out with the bathwater. How do you find that that's serving you as you're moving on to this, in transition into a new chapter of your career?
I find that serves me in the, well, adaptive stability, that my thought leadership is really around, it's, borrowing a lot of concepts from risk management, and was a contract lawyer, so it was always about making the deal and putting the guardrails, I suppose, in place to make sure that if the worst happens, you're prepared. So um, and then throughout my career and my life, I've had various events and things that have helped me become resilient, and so I use that as well, every day, especially forging a new path. And I suppose I have been deliberate in my career, in the sense of I was on a comfortable track, could have stayed, become a partner in a law firm, but actually decided that wasn't for me and made a deliberate shift to go into government, and broaden out from running a legal team to doing more governance and risk, big projects and other, regulatory legislation. That was all deliberate shifts from the comfortable track I was on to something more, to increase that growth and challenge myself, and constantly seeking a, a role or a vocation that really suited my natural preferences.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well, it
feel
sounds like
like,
you made a very deliberate decision, around that transition, and good on you, because a lot of us sit here, for years and years and years going, I really should do that thing. And there's, life, we know, and without wanting to get too philosophical about it, but we're here for a relatively short time. So to not live out that purpose, particularly when we've got a deliberate vision, would be a shame. So it's great to hear that you've done that. And I can't wait to hear more and read more in your book, because no doubt you're going to bring more of that in around, that transition, but then borrowing and really leveraging from that space, where you've got some, deep technical expertise as you embark on this new phase. With that, I guess, Suzie, have you got like a standout lesson or piece of advice that you want to share with other deliberate leaders that you've learnt through your career around being more deliberate, but also, that might influence your approach to leadership, and also in the work that you do now, more in that consulting space?
yeah. My key thing would be to look after the people.
Yeah,
Um, I've always taken a people first approach. Um, and if you don't have your team, you don't have anything.
yeah,
And I suppose in the consulting space, to look after your clients. Uh, so in times of change and uncertainty, I think there is a real temptation to focus on just delivery, and everyone has to do nights and weekends and work, full on. Um, and I think, there can be a tendency to just say, oh, we don't need the team meeting and we don't need the social thing. And we don't, we're not going to do any of that because we're in a panic. But I think, and people can often think you as a leader that you're too busy for them to approach you with issues. And that's when, I think you still need to make the time to check in with people, and give them opportunities to enjoy coming to work. I would say that's the biggest piece of advice I would give leaders, is don't forget the people.
yeah. Being deliberate, because that word has got such it's infused with action, right? It's energetic, it's dynamic, it's, deliberate, we're on a path. But I think it's a really good point, because sometimes we can be very fixated on the vision and where we want to go. And we may, inadvertently or deliberately kind of forget that there's a team that needs to come with us, whether it's our clients or our team or our whatever stakeholder group it is. And that without them, as you say, the plan might be thwarted in terms of where we want to go, or we might be slowed down, or we might never be able to realize it because we don't have that support of others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's especially when you're leading a team of people. So I'm a solopreneur now, but in a sense, I'm a leader as a coach of my clients, and always trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and what might help them, I think, is really important. So I might think, oh, well, it's really important to do all these systems things and tackle my to-do list, but if I forget my clients and what I've promised to send them and how they might be feeling and checking in with them and that kind of thing, then you might not have any clients. So
Yeah.
it's really important to nurture the people, I think.
Yeah, it's a good, it also makes me think then too, as we're thinking about people and clients or our team, but then how can we also be very deliberate about our conversations and our recognition and, our any form of communication, really, our feedback. Like, it kind of extends to then demonstrating that care and compassion in a very deliberate way. So we're not doing it in a reactive way, which is, what we spent the earlier part of this conversation talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. My last executive job, we had a branch meeting every month, and we would deliberately give each other gratitude and recognition. So we'd look at the organization's values and then say thank you to people related, that demonstrated those values, and were deliberately sort of thinking about giving each other gratitude at every meeting. And then it would, be on a slide here, all the people that were thanked, and, calling out particular things. And I think even just that, just being, showing gratitude to people deliberately rather than incidentally or forgetting, is really important.
Makes a big difference. It really shows people that genuine care and a set as compassion. But that recognition that you matter, like we value what you're doing for our team, or we value what you're doing as a service provider or as a client. I
Yeah,
think it's super important.
absolutely.
Suzie, thank you so much. I've got I know that when I've got pages of notes, which is, I know with my podcast guests, I'm very lucky because I do have pages of notes here. What I've taken away from our conversation is really about, you mentioned before that the guide really, which is around mindset, flexibility, and resilience. I know that they're tenets of your central model, which is going to be in your book, Adaptive Stability. The Future Keeps Coming out in 2025. You've really shone a light on those principles for us today around, just knowing your strengths and weaknesses, in particular with mindset, developing that growth or capitalizing that growth mindset, staying positive, that flexibility, which we talked about. So seeking diverse views to our own and really testing our views, because I can sit here going, my idea is great. But unless I'm testing that with others, we all love to hear the sound of our own ideas. Surely that just can't be me. And I loved too that the standout for me is that willingness to change decisions, and how do you maintain your credibility in doing that so you're not looking like you're kind of flopping around, as we talked about.
Yeah.
So much in here, Suzie. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Deliberate Leader podcast. I can't wait to read your book when it comes out, and we'll definitely have you back when the book's out, because I'm sure you'll have a whole bunch to share with us more about mindset, flexibility, and resilience.
I'd love that, Rita, and thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you. Wow, that was a fantastic conversation with Suzie Thoraval. I wanted to sum it up, so you've got those points just in case you're looking for what are the highlights that you can practically take away from that conversation. So really, Suzie talked to us about her experience, obviously, in risk and governance and the law, and how she is using that to help leaders to move into what she calls adaptive stability. Can't wait for Suzie's new book, which comes out in early 2025. It's Adaptive Stability, The Future Keeps Coming. Some takeaways for me from that conversation are really around, the downside of being reactive. And, Suzie talked about that front page of the paper can dictate for her, particularly in government, how the rest of the day can play out. And, she also gave us some insights there into perspective and, how can we climb that tree rather than just hack our way through the jungle. Suzie talked to us about mindset, knowing our strengths, really, deepening our sense of growth mindset. So knowing that, we can overcome challenges and overcome problems. She loves to listen to affirmations, and she gave us an insight into how she uses those. The key standout for me was, how can we be deliberate and also demonstrate stability? And so a lot of leaders, struggle with that around deliberate decision making, but then also adaptability in their decision making. And so Suzie, was able to give us some really great insights into how that works. I'm sure that you found that as interesting as I did, and please be on the lookout for Suzie's book next year. I'm hoping that you got a lot out of that podcast. So if you did, please leave us a review, leave us a comment. Please also share and subscribe so we can get the Deliberate Leader message out to a broader group, which we love to do. We are so fortunate to have a community of deliberate leaders which really engage with our work, and I'd love to make that an even bigger community, of course, with your help and support. Thanks again for tuning in today.